Please note that the views expressed on this program are those of the individuals who speak them, and not necessarily those of Portsmouth Community Radio, its Board of Trustees, members, volunteers, or underwriters. Good evening and welcome to Spirit Radio. I am your host, Willie Hassell. Along with my co-host, Lynn Nickerson, we will take you on a journey into the unknown where the paranormal becomes the normal. A journey to a world cloaked in darkness where reality becomes a thin veil. So sit back, relax, and join us as we venture into the shadows, the darkness, the unknown, and back. And good evening and welcome once again to Spirit Radio, the Paranormal Experience. I am your host, Willie Hassell, your gatekeeper to the dark side, your guide to the realm of the unknown, the unseen, the unthinkable. And she is the always lovely, she is the mystical, she is the mysterious, Lynn Nickerson.
Good evening, Willie. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, good. Did you have a good day?
Actually, as a matter of fact, I did. It was rather warm and nice out. So
it was sunny.
I went to the beach and I went for a little bit of a walk.
The only detractor was there were many chemtrails in the sky today. Had beautiful blue sky first thing in the morning, and then that all disappeared.
Then they went and ruined it, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
So we have some exciting guests once again.
We do. And hopefully I hooked up all the wires and the cables here again for
I certainly hope
the
so.
correct way for Skype. But if not, we have a phone number for backup. So tonight on Spirit Radio, the Paranormal Experience. It was in March of 1948, only 8 months after the famous Roswell UFO crash, when a 100-foot diameter saucer crashed in the desert in Aztec, New Mexico, and was moved to a secret military laboratory. Tonight's guests, Scott and Suzanne Ramsey, are the authors of the Aztec UFO Incident, the case, evidence, and elaborate cover-up of one of the most perplexing crashes in history, including testimony of witnesses sworn to secrecy by the U.S. military, as well as previously unseen documents from the CIA, the FBI, U.S. Air Force, and U.S. Army that constitute a cover-up whose sole purpose was to surround the Aztec story with a smokescreen of lies, misinformation, and destructive allegations. But now, after some 29 years of research, Scott and Suzanne, along with co-author Frank Thayer, reveal the truth about this long-standing mystery in the New Mexico desert. And so let us welcome to the show Scott and Suzanne Ramsey. Good evening. Welcome to Spirit Radio.
Good evening.
Hello.
Good evening.
Oh, good. You're
How are
both
you?
there. Just great. So nice to have you both on. So,
Well, it's a pleasure.
what a monumental task the book must have been. I mean, years of research.
Well, it's been a journey. Let's put it that way.
But, just trying to get it organized and put it in a sequential form must have been a real task.
It was.
Oh, I bet it was. You did.
And I think the fact of trying to figure out, in writing a book, this is our second book on it, and you're limited to how much information you can put in.
Right.
It's not like it's infinity on the numbers. So
right.
So the documents and things, it's hard to try and choose which ones and how much to put in. You just could go on and on and on.
Yeah, you did a superlative job organizing it.
Well, thank you. That's very nice.
You're very welcome. Well, I would like to give the audience a little history about this time period to put the story in context. So the Aztec incident happened not long after the well-publicized crash of Roswell, which was still very fresh in the minds of everybody. On July 8, 1947, on a ranch just outside of Roswell, in the small village of Corona, the crash occurred, and although there were many witnesses, it was followed by an immediate cover-up. So for approximately 4 decades, the event was obscured until the 1980s when people began to seriously question what happened. But only 8 months after the event at Roswell, On March 25, 1948, another crash purportedly took place that fewer people knew about, and it remained in obscurity for many years as well. So, this brings us to the time period when you jumped in and decided to research. And I can't get over what a roller coaster ride this must have been for you guys for 29 years, working on uncovering the truth. So, you must have been very determined to solve this mystery. And now, $500,000 later, you not only stumbled on the truth, but you verified many of the labyrinthine details of this extensive cover-up. So, I pose to both of you, what was the initial intrigue for uncovering this story? And I ask this because you persistently pursued this, along with Suzanne, for such a protracted period of time, at a great personal cost to you both.
Well, I guess that goes back to I first heard about the story. Excuse me, allergies are killing me. When I was on a business trip to the nearby town of Farmington, and some local gentlemen at the plant I was calling on were talking about what they were going to do that weekend. And I was basically just overhearing their conversation. And then one said he was going to go out to Hart Canyon and look for a place to hunt mule deer. And the other gentleman said, well, hey, I may join you. Where are you going to be? Hart Canyon's a big place. And he said, I'll buy the old crash site. So my ears perked up, and I kind of invited myself into the conversation. And, well, long story short, we got done testing a big generator that night, and I invited him back to the Holiday Inn to have a cold beer on a Friday night. I was going to fly out Monday. And we got over, and during our nightcap of a beer, I asked him to draw on a napkin, a bar napkin, how I could get to this alleged crash site in the next town over. And not so sure I really found the right mesa the first go around, but at least I found Hart Canyon Road in the Hart Canyon area. And about 6 weeks later, I was back out to see the customer and planned a little bit more of a trip. And with the help of a few friends, we located what the locals call the old crash site. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how the journey began. After that, I was just at the point it got under my skin, and I was determined to do all the research I could on it.
I might add, though, that Scott, and you know, thankfully we all are optimistic when we start a project, or we probably would never undertake it if we would have known it was 29, 30 years of work. But he started out, and in his mind he thought, I'll either prove or disprove this in 6 months. Well, famous last words.
6 months, okay.
Oh, yeah.
6 months.
At what point, Suzanne, did you feel that you were really interested in pursuing this with Scott?
Well, as a child, my mother was reading Frank Scully's book. Frank was the original person that wrote about this.
Yes.
And I was born in the 60s, and it was mid-60s, although Frank's book was written in the 1950. So she was reading it. We lived in South Dakota, and I just remembered reading it. And when my folks wanted to move to a warmer climate, not to retire, but they wanted to get out of the cold, they decided to look at Aztec, New Mexico, because my mom thought, isn't that, that was such an interesting story, and I'd sure like to learn more about it. Well, when she moved down there, she realized it was a dead story. Nobody wanted to talk about it. They kind of laughed it off, and she was greatly, greatly disappointed. And I will tell you this, and I'm grateful. Scott was on my radio show down there, and he had began re-exploring it, and that's where my appetite really got whetted for it. And
neat.
And then we got together, and then that's how it all came about.
Oh, that's very cool. What part did Frank Thayer play?
Oh, a huge part. Actually, one day before our first book came out, I was sitting at my desk at work and eating my sandwich, and for some reason I was drawn to an article on the internet that was written about the Aztec crash. And so many on the internet are junk, and they're old regurgitated hoax stories. Mm-hmm. And this gentleman, Dr. Frank Thayer, wrote a very good book that was well written and well documented. so I shot him an email, and I congratulated him on his article. And I said, boy, this is really, excuse me, a breath of fresh air to see an article based with facts and fact-based and accurate. And he emailed me back and said, hey, there's a guy in North Carolina that's doing a lot of research. You ought to look into what he's doing. And I emailed back. I said, I think I'm that guy. And so we just struck up a friendship. And he actually talked us into doing the first book. He said, you research, you put it together, and I'll write and proofread. And we just became a good team. We blew through the first book real well. We never gave up on the research. As a matter of fact, we haven't as of today. I mean, today we actually did some research on leads, and the three of us work very, very well as a team. Actually, there's more than three of us. Mike Price, who can't be left out, although his name doesn't appear in the book. He's an aviation historian that helps us quite a bit, keeping us on the straight and narrow.
Yeah, you mentioned him in the beginning of the book, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Helping, yes, okay.
As well as Mr. Steinman, who wrote the second book on Aztec. He actually has been a great resource for us too. And what's really kind of fun at this point is that that we are able to contact him and kind of go over some of the research and bounce things back and forth. And it's very exciting to me that it's not a me or he or she, it's all our credit. It's all of us working together, and that he's just as enthusiastic. Here's a lead that I found, but I couldn't follow up. See what you guys can do, and vice versa. And you know, it's really, really been a treat. We really, really appreciate him too.
Yeah, a nice collaborative effort. All right, I wanted to touch on the crash itself and what was seen, and then I want to get into the controversy of Scully's book and so forth. But I was curious about the occupants. I had a question in my mind. Once you felt that you had found the crash site and so forth, what was the story of the occupants? There were supposed to be two dead inside, and then people crawled all over it, and a panel opened up, and they got to, go inside?
Well, basically, look, it was a three-story craft. It was rather large. It was 100 feet in diameter and about 18 feet tall. Ooh. And they poked around with the oil field workers were basically the first group of people there. Shortly after, a couple of ranchers, two police officers, and some other individuals kind of thrown in the mix. Some of the oil field workers went and grabbed a pull off of one of the oil field trucks and poked around. There was a hole in a porthole. Mm-hmm. And they were poking around. And to hear these guys, I mean, we interviewed them, you know, they were up in their latter years, and they were 19 and 20-year-old kids when this took place in 1950. And their first thoughts that this is a rescue mission, that this craft, whatever it is one of ours. Oh. You know, right after World War II, 1948, 3 years after World War II, this is a rescue mission because this is probably some kind of top secret aircraft, and there's probably people inside that are hurt. And by poking and probing around with this pole, somehow they activated a door that opened up, more of a door that dropped down, so to speak.
Like a ramp.
Kind of a ramp type deal. And once they poked their heads up inside the craft, they could see more bodies. The top dome, there were two at a control panel, according to these guys.
So no one had been thrown from the vehicle, is that right?
There was virtually no damage to the craft. And all the witnesses we talked to and the sketches they drew, they said they never saw any visible damage. It was almost like it landed remotely, or it was not on a landing gear or tripod. It definitely scraped across the mesa, but whatever it was made out of, there was no visible damage.
Just one tiny, tiny little hole about the size of a quarter. That's what they pushed the pole through. Other than that, no damage. And inside there appeared to be no damage. Now the bodies appeared to be charred. Oh. There was a total of 16 bodies, and the bodies appeared to be charred, but there was no burns or anything inside of the craft. So
Almost like a decompression type thing.
something along those
Really?
lines.
Mhm.
Do you think there was a case of any burning?
Well, we're only as good as our witnesses, and they said there was nothing inside the craft that showed any sign of fire. So we make an assumption, which is very dangerous, I know, but it was almost like just a bad decompression, and possibly that caused the charring.
Oh, how
Very,
tragic.
very strange.
Yeah. Well, take into consideration that there was a pretty clean, full-blown cover-up. I think it's accurate to state that Frank Scully's 1950 book called Behind the Flying Saucers opened up a whole can of worms, and then the story was written off as a hoax for some time. So this brings us to the complexity of this situation, of the Newton, Scully, and Kahn connection. So I was hoping maybe briefly you could apprise the audience, starting with the lecture of Silas Newton at the University of Denver on the 8th of March, 1950, which led to Scully's book, and then which led to the ensuing vilification of Newton perpetrated by Kahn. I think that's a really big part of this whole investigative situation, don't you?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you so much for having read the book and for stating that so well. You really got it.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Scott.
Well, Scully was told the story in 1949 by a mega millionaire oilman, Silas Mason Newton. And he had had correspondence back and forth with Scully over the years. They became very good friends, and it's kind of funny because Frank Scully was a diehard liberal Democrat, and Silas Newton was a gun-toting, crazy conservative, just to the extreme. Each one was the extreme of each party. And yet they were very good friends, and Silas Newton actually helped finance Scully's run in politics in one election, which he did not make. But anyway, I'm just trying to form how these guys got together. And in 1949, Scully was approached by Silas Newton, and he said, I've got a story. I've got a big story. And with him was his sidekick, Leo Gebauer. And they said there's a group of scientists that have the story of all stories. It's about a downed and recovered flying saucer. And the story is going to break eventually, but they want you to break the story. And there was a little bit of truth to that, but I don't think the government was ready to break the story to the public.
Right.
So they sat, I'll give you the kind of the Reader's Digest version. They sat Scully down, these group of scientists, 8 to 9 scientists that Scully referred to over the years as the Dr. G's. And these were men of science, very credible people. We identify them to the best of our ability in the book. I don't know if it's perfect, but we did the best we could. And within, I think it was 96 days by Scully's admission, he wrote the book Behind the Flying Saucers based on the story told by the scientists.
Yeah, I noticed. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that the lecture took place in March, and Scully had that book out before the end of 1950. That's pretty fast.
Yeah, March 8th was the lecture at the University of Denver, and September 17th, I believe, 1950 is when Holt released the book.
Wow, quick.
And the only public awareness was when Silas Newton lectured at the University of Denver to a packed, standing room only crowd of students about the Aztec flying saucer. And we actually found that lecture. I don't know if we talk about that in the book.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, we have a copy not 5 feet from where Suzanne and I are sitting. It was on an old wire recorder, and we, of course, had it converted. Now we have it on CD, and it's Silas Newton's voice giving the lecture to the students. And he explains to the students that this flying saucer was recovered not 500 miles from where he was standing, and on and on. And the story went very well for 2 years, and then good things got to come to an end. The book sold to over 64,000 copies.
Wow.
which is huge back in 1950,
Yeah.
and it was the first hardback book ever written about flying saucers. Donald Kehoe had the first book out. It was a paperback. They came out just about neck and neck.
Where the problem came in,
It was the Mr. J.P. Kahn that you mentioned earlier.
Right.
He approached Scully before the book came out, and he had worked at the San Francisco Chronicle. He still had a desk there, but he was more or less freelancing for the Chronicle. And he approached Scully and said, "Hey, we want to buy this story. This story is huge." And Ken Purdy from True Magazine had also tried to buy it, but Scully already had his deal with Henry Hoyt and Company. Why would he want to sell?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess Kahn, we flew out and interviewed an ex-employee of the Chronicle that worked with Kahn in the 50s and 60s. I guess Kahn had sort of convinced Scott Newhall, who was the one of the upper management, that the story was in the bag,
Mm-hmm.
that they were going to buy it from Scully and just run with it, and everybody's going to make millions of dollars.
That white lie came back to bite him, didn't it?
It sure did. And
I think his ego came back to bite him.
Yeah.
Truly,
He felt
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
Mr. Big Shot, I got this in the bag.
And he had to quickly come back and tell Scott Newhall, well, we don't have the story. Scully's going to go with Henry Hoyt and Company. And at which point, according to the former employees, Scott Newhall was okay with that. I mean, he was a pretty easygoing manager and let things roll off his back. But J.P. Kahn felt that his ego was pretty badly bruised. So he decided, if I can't have the story, I'll ruin it. And he went after Scully. He went after
Newton.
Leo Gebauer. And he went after everybody he could go after. And we have a copy in the book. He single-handedly wrote J. Edgar Hoover
Yes.
and told him about this. And the Air Force and the Pentagonians, as Scully would call them, the people in the government, already were upset the story was leaked through the University of Denver. And so, I mean, to write a letter to J. Edgar Hoover and then have Hoover write you back a letter, that's pretty big.
Yeah.
And so the story was ruined from there. And to this day, if you type in Aztec flying saucer story, it's impossible to not come across an article where, well, this was just a story by a bunch of con men, and there's nothing to it.
And you see the word hoax very frequently.
Yeah.
And the problem is, if you, couple things, if you only do research through the internet, that's what you're going to find. If you actually go out, boots on the ground, and follow through, you see the whole story. You see that J.P. Kahn was a man that never had to work a day in his life.
Mm-hmm.
He was very, very wealthy, and that he was kind of a bitter person, and that he would follow through and do things like this. And so he had the ways and means to do it. And the fact of the hoax, if you don't follow the full story, and it's like watching a movie or anything else. You only see part of the story.
Yep.
You only know part of the story.
And you believe
and
what
then
you're
it's been
told.
regurgitated. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's been regurgitated on the internet.
But it was very successful in the eyes of the military, the government, the FBI. They got the story discredited. It disappeared as fast as it came. The story basically lived for 2 years, and then it died a very quick death.
Do you suppose the FBI would have come after Newton or Scully if Kahn didn't?
Interesting. In all the interviews we did over the years, it goes back to the tapes that we have of the Air Force. George Kohler, not to confuse your audience, George Kohler was with Scully and Newton and some of the scientists that night when the lecture was given at the University of Denver. And actually, as one of the scientists backed out at the last minute, and that's why Newton gave the lecture.
Ah.
And at the end of the lecture, the Air Force sent two guys. We have the transcribed interview in our book. They were more interested in not about Frank Scully writing the book, but who is leaking the information to Frank Scully.
Ah.
because a lot of technology was divulged back then that I'm not so sure the government really wanted on the street.
And it was George
And
Kohler that had the contacts.
George Kohler was a radio ad salesman for the local radio in Denver. He was very well connected. He was an ex-Chicago Bears football player, so he carried a name, and he ran with a pretty big crowd. And Kohler was the one that also, with Francis Borman, arranged the lecture at the university.
Ah.
And so that was a name that the Air Force knew to go after. And, in talking or in looking at the letters back and forth, the government was more interested in who in the heck is leaking the story to Scully, not so much being mad at Scully.
Okay,
But
Scott.
by shutting the story down, by discrediting everybody, it was a victory.
Well, we're going to talk about the results of the trial about this whole fiasco when we could come back. We're right now at the bottom of the hour, so we're going to take a really quick break, and we're talking to Scott and Suzanne Ramsey, and their book is The Aztec UFO Incident. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Supernatural Magazine, the UK's newest paranormal magazine, provides support to Spirit Radio, the Paranormal Experience. It is the magazine's goal to bring every aspect of supernatural news and research from around the world under one roof to create a universal platform for all those interested in the supernatural. More information is available at supernaturalmagazine.com. You are listening to Spirit Radio, the Paranormal Experience on WSCA 106.1 FM, and we'll be right back after this short break.
You are listening to WSCA 106.1 FM in Portsmouth's West End, and from the community calendar, the works of renowned American Impressionist painter Edwin C. Tarbell will be on display every Friday now until June 3rd from 9:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the Discovery, Portsmouth, located at 10 Middle Street in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. An illuminated Tarbell, Life and Art of the Piscataqua. Yeah, the Piscataqua. We know that one. Is a two-part show with the largest collection of his original works, plus a companion gallery featuring 6 contemporary painters who worked in the Tarbell style. The show also features nearly 60 works featuring Tarbell's 30 years of living along the Piscataqua River. For more information about this event, visit their website, portsmouthhistory.com, or call them at 603-647-6439. And Lynn, I believe you probably have some upcoming guests.
That's
to the
right.
show.
Our guest list starts with April 23rd. The Impasse Quest, which is the latest release of the Reverends Betty Comerford and Steve Wilson, will be the topic of conversation. These two psychic and caring people lend their guidance to those who find themselves overwhelmed by the emotions of others. April 30th. Our beloved lighthouse historian, Jeremy D'Entremont, will join us once again to wrap up the tales and histories of his West Coast Lighthouse tour just a few months ago. May 7th, we welcome back Joni Mahan. She's written about the hauntings of the Victorian Mansion in Gardner, Mass., and now she has a new release titled Devil's Toy Box. May 14th, we've got a new topic to explore on Spirit Radio, and that would be Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Kelly and Kawani Laprasitis will be our guests, and they've had extensive encounters with both ETs and Sasquatch. Kawani is an author of 2 books on the subject, and he's also he's got a background in holistic health, anthropology, psychology, and herbology. May 21st, Michelle Matuz's tarot deck is finally ready for release. Michelle is a psychic medium empath who is also an historic reenactor and a member of the Spirit Light Network in addition to being an artist. She's releasing a deck of tarot cards, all of which display her artwork, and she'll be talking to us about that. And that wraps up our upcoming guest list.
All right, very good. Well, that is our guest list in the coming weeks. But now let us go back to tonight's guests, Scott and Suzanne Ramsey, authors of the Aztec UFO Incident. Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
So we were talking about the trial of poor Silas Newton and Scully and so forth. I do have a question. Do you suppose that Kahn had some sort of intimate knowledge with the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover? How else would he have been able to pull those strings?
Oh, yeah, well, I don't know the answer to that, but he was well connected, as we saw as we went through documents. I guess being he was a pretty well-known reporter for the Chronicle. That was the time that Scott Newhall came on board and was really rebuilding the Chronicle and really getting some powerful reporters and good reporters on board. My interview with Bob McClay, who was Silas's best friend, or Silas's, J.P. Kahn's best friend, and the executor of his estate after Kahn died, I interviewed him on tape for 2.5 hours, and only a tiny smidgen's in the book.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Kahn was well known enough to pen a letter to J. Edgar Hoover and get a response back, and to get at least 4 FBI offices investigating. When I say at least, I think there were 6, but 4 for sure had an open case on researching and investigating Leo Gabauer, Silas Newton, and Frank Scully to some extent.
Yeah, that seems to be a lot of pull there.
Yeah.
So during the trial, what I found very curious was talking about the doodlebug and the one that they used for the device to show to the jury. And unfortunately, the jury did not judge in favor of Silas, and he was found guilty. But it was never brought, it appeared to me, to the judge's attention or the jury that what they were showing was not what Silas had been using to look for oil and water and so forth.
No, and that whole trial was a kangaroo court. Keep in mind when the FBI tried to arrest, for the lack of a better word, or depose and with a subpoena Silas Newton, they tried to go after him in 4 states: Colorado, New Mexico, California, and Arizona. And they couldn't get a federal judge to swear out a warrant. They said this is a civil case, not a criminal case. And it all started over Kahn convinced one of Silas Newton's clients that he was being swindled in an oil deal and in some technology he had bought into. That's the only angle they could go after these guys, the doodlebug you're talking about.
And that was Kahn convincing this other guy that he had been wronged.
It was Herman Flater, a con artist himself out of Denver, who was selling $250,000 health machines. You'd get in like a phone booth, turn it on, and it would cure you of anything and everything you ever had.
Wish I had one of those.
Yeah.
And make us all look younger. And so, you had a business guy that was selling interest in oil wells, and the ironic thing was Flater was one of 32 or 33 investors in an oil well. And the reason I say that, the court documents, one time they list 32, next time they list 33.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was getting a royalty check every month, even Flater.
And still he complained. Still it was twisted.
He was being influenced by Kahn, who said, look, this whole thing's a Ponzi scheme. You're going to get burned at the end. Oh, and by the way, that doodlebug device that you bought into is nothing at all. It's junk. And that's how they took these guys to court, to discredit the whole Aztec story. And Keating...
That's so wrong.
Yeah. Silas Newton's attorney was told by Keating, the prosecutor, district attorney, that they couldn't submit as evidence the other investors that were getting royalty checks, that was inadmissible in court. And then when they presented the court and the jury with the doodlebug machine, it wasn't even the one the FBI had confiscated. That disappeared and had never been found to this day.
I can't believe that they didn't call anybody on that in court.
Well, it's interesting. We have here recently, and thanks to Bill Steinman, received a lot of the court documents. I thought I had a lot, but as Bill Steinman moved, he's come across more. And those documents, I mean, they're going back to 1952. This started out as a civil case, and then it turns into a criminal case. But going back to the 4 judges that told the FBI, you guys don't have a case here, and if you do, it's civil and leave us out of it. They went and got a magistrate in Colorado to swear out a warrant for Newton's arrest. And, when you see these things happening, these are very, very powerful people that are pushing from behind the scenes. And probably at the direction of J. Edgar Hoover and the military that are saying, we need to get this thing discredited and bring it to a head so we can find out who's talking. That was the whole thing. The whole thing is who is leaking this information about the technology and a retrieved flying saucer to Frank Scully.
So, what was the end result of the trial?
Well, it depends. If you read what the debunkers put on the internet, that they were fined some outrageous money for for damages, that's not true at all. We know now from the documents we have that this criminal case disappeared. There was no sentence, no anything, and Newton was handed court costs of $18,000, which he negotiated down to something like $1,500.
Wow.
Paid it, went out to dinner with a reporter that night, like nothing ever happened.
Oh my, what a ruse.
Well, in looking at what he wrote over the years, he had some unpublished manuscripts that we found. He knew the whole thing was a con job by the government to begin with, and the guy was worth $25 million in 1952.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's a lot of money for an individual oil guy. And to him, this was static. This was just background noise.
I don't know how he persevered, really, being, pursued like that. Now, how about, in addition to Scully, there were other people that were trying to expose the truth, too. So I thought maybe you'd like to touch on William Steinman and Wendell Stevens, as well as Chris Evans. I found, what they had to put up with and what resulted with them was really kind of tragic.
Yeah, just to give your audience just a quick history, Frank Scully's book came out again September, I think, 17th, 1950. It may have been the 18th. Bill Steinman followed up with a book called UFO Crash at Aztec, with co-written by Wendell Stevens, and that came out roughly July of '86. It was a self-published book. Roughly 1,000 copies were printed. I think it's an incredibly good book. That book led me to a long, long friendship with Bill Steinman. He's still a dear friend to this day. We talk at least 3-4 times a week.
Oh, terrific.
The book didn't do very well at all. This is before the internet. They were literally lugging books around in the trunk of their car, going to UFO conferences, trying to sell them. Now it's a very desirable book to get. You can find them on Amazon. They're getting kind of expensive. Chris Evans, roughly 2003, did a book, Alien Conspiracy, which I'm guessing half the book is about Aztec. Chris had some good financing behind him, good cash behind him. So he traveled the country and was able to really do hardcore research and did an incredibly good job. Unfortunately, he was coming here for a 3-day weekend to finally meet Suzanne and I, and we were going to compare notes on his somewhat successful book. But unfortunately, he was killed just days before he was coming here to the house.
Well, the buzz is that he jumped off the I-64 bridge somewhere in West Virginia. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I find it extremely hard to believe
Really?
But I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I had never met the man, but many conversations on the phone.
Hmm.
Um, I guess
Things
I'll just
happen.
hold my opinion.
Yeah.
It's just hard to say.
Yeah. And William Steinman, I don't know what resulted with Wendell Stevens, but William Steinman was sort of forced out of the military, and then he couldn't get another job again in the aeronautics industry after that book was released.
Well, he wasn't in the, well, he had been in the military as a younger man. He was in the aerospace industry as a QC expert, quality control person. Um, kind of warned before the book came out to back off. We do a lot of work with the government. We don't need a UFO book coming out from one of our top people. The book came out. Bill's job disappeared. He was never able to get another job in aerospace till his retirement age.
Yeah, that's sad. All
Yeah.
right. Well, getting around to your research, we probably have about 10 more minutes left. The obstacles about the crash, you went to the site many times, and you were trying to establish the fact that the road in 1948 did exist that led to this particular mesa. You also wanted to investigate the concrete slab and the trees, and especially the trees that were cut down, and then the trees that were planted in a straight row. And there were also records that something large was moved on the highway sometime in March of 1948. So could you tell us a little bit more in depth what you discovered regarding those points?
Sure. We decided we really had to look for physical evidence. This craft came down on top of a mesa in a very, very rocky terrain area. I can't even imagine what it was like back in 1948. It's still extremely tough terrain today. I tell people, we were talking to people today that are going to go out to Aztec this summer at dinner we were at tonight, and I told them, I said, do not even attempt it until you go to the local Hertz rental place in Farmington, because they have high center gravity vehicles and four-wheel drive. They cater primarily to the people in the oil field industry, so they have the right vehicles, and it's very, very difficult. But we spent a lot of time looking for physical evidence to support the story. And yes, back in the 80s, when I first stumbled on the site, and Steinman being a few years ahead of me, you could definitely see, and even people that aren't really into the UFO story will agree something crashed up on that mesa. It just it has all the scenes of a crash site. There were broken and twisted, mangled trees at the top. They have all subsequently been moved, and they're still there, but they're moved now to the western edge of the crash site. The Bureau of Land Management owns the land. They made us do that for the amount of people that were coming through. It had to be a kind of a touristy, safe walking way around up there. We didn't realize till we overflew in a private plane back in 2010 that there is a section just north of where the craft stopped of newly planted trees that were probably damaged when they removed the object out of there. But there's a perfectly grid section of new cottonwood trees. Well, when I say new, that's relative.
Pinion.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
yeah.
Pinion trees. Pretty
Pinions.
bad when you don't know your pinion from your cotton. But, nature doesn't grow trees that way.
No, not straight in a row.
No. And then a number of years back, Suzanne and I basically laying around one night, and I said, the biggest criticism about the Aztec craft crashing or landing is how the heck did the government get it out of there? This object's 100 feet in diameter. And to our breath of deep air, we decided the only way to do it was we had to reenact moving the craft.
I might add that Scott's wife, Suzanne, had a moment about that. Let me just tell you.
Doing a reenactment of moving a crash flying saucer is not cheap. But
Ooh,
we hired Bill Metzger and his lovely wife Pam. Bill had retired from being in that industry.
The industry of moving high and wide objects.
large
So he was an
equipment.
excellent, right?
Yeah, very very large objects. Bill had spent a career doing, and actually that's what my father did for a living. So Bill worked for my father.
Oh, interesting.
And he was the best in the industry. A lot of articles written about him. Bill himself, by the way, is a established writer. So I contacted Bill and said, we got to put this thing to bed one way or another. We all met out in Aztec, New Mexico, and with the help of Suzanne's brother Russ, taking us on all the alternate roads, because there was some controversy whether Highway 44 was complete at the time. They were redoing roads in 1948, 49, and 50 because of the Chaco Canyon ruins. The Anasazi ruins there were being open to the public, so they were kind of rerouting roads. And using 1948 technology, we reenacted moving it. With pinch poles and making sure we could squeeze through the canyons, and we did it twice, and it was a success both ways. So we knew moving it was possible.
And
So-
of course, we had to go back and track to make sure that they were the roads that were available at that time.
Yeah, and whether
So-
they could make the passes and the switchbacks or whatever. But do
Right.
you think they ever disassembled the craft in some way?
Yes, Frank Scully actually talked about that in his book in 1950, that the craft did come apart. But still, when you take a craft apart that's 100 feet
Huge.
in diameter, that's still, you're still looking at very large sections.
It came in three pieces. Came apart in three pieces.
Oh. Oh, that's interesting. But so you proved that it could physically be done, and that was the important thing.
Yes.
On site, two things that I might add that were particularly interesting for us in terms of physical evidence at the crash site was we had found out from a military person that had done paperwork on the craft at the time of the incident that we would be looking for an area that had a road that seemed to go to nowhere, and then in the middle of the desert there's a cement slab, and that was to pull the craft, to pull a crane in, and then a slab to steady the crane so that it could pick up the craft and move it. The other piece of physical evidence that was very, very interesting that we were able to just this very year document was one of the early witnesses in the morning was Valentine Archuleta.
Yes.
And he was a Baton Death March survivor. He was a goat rancher, now home on his ranch. He went out at 5 o'clock in the morning to let his goats out of the corral and heard a loud noise, looked up, and there was the craft, and it hit into some cliffs and bluffs near his house, and then bounced off and continued where it ended up a few miles away, landing. But when it scraped the bluff, there were actually sparks. No one had ever been able to find them. We were able to track them down this year, and there is a gouge in the cliff.
Wow.
And it's clearly, there's a lot of sandstone there, so you have to look for volcanic rock, because there were sparks that occurred. And we actually were able to document a picture of that, and I can't tell you, that was one of those moments we were so tired, and we were up there hours and hours and hours trying to track it, and years in the waiting to be able to get to that point, and we were so tired that we couldn't even really celebrate it with us.
But the other interesting piece of that too is Archuleta had a copy of his phone bill when he called the military.
He has. It was not a phone bill. It's a copy from the Blanco Mercantile Exchange.
Okay.
Ironically, I'll do this real quick because I know we're running out of time. Ironically, they had a phone at that house for many years, and a couple of years before, they took the phone out. The Aztec Telephone Company had run a power and phone line all the way from Aztec to his ranch in Blanco. But in 1948, they were without phone, but all the ranchers used a community phone at the Blanco Mercantile Exchange, where they had access 24 hours a day to go in. There was a little table and chair and a pad and paper and a telephone. And the phone bill appeared on his monthly statement that he got from the Mercantile Exchange. And
Excellent.
it was 3 attempts to call Kirkland Air Force Base and get somebody's attention to say, hey, those crazy flying saucers you guys are so worked up about, well, one just hit my mesa behind the ranch, and it's heading north. And they asked where, and he said, well, due north. And they said, be specific. And he said, toward Hart Canyon.
Well, that was a valuable piece of evidence, don't you think?
There's a whole lot of valuable evidence we in the last year that Suzanne and I have gotten, and some valuable people that have come forward as soon as the book came out.
Oh, that's excellent.
And we jokingly say maybe there's a 3rd book in the works, but I don't know. We got to get through the 2nd one here.
Every time that we think we've got all that we possibly can, we've exhausted every effort, and then luckily, on one hand, more information seems to come, and so it keeps us rolling.
Well, I think there's a 3rd book in the works, but I did want to say, to my way of thinking, that your research was really successful because you not only set out to solve the mystery at hand by proving that there was a crash, but that you also cleared the names and the reputations of both Silas Newton and Frank Scully and Gaybauer?
Yeah, Leo Gaybauer, right?
Gaybauer.
You know what? Thank you for saying that.
No, truly.
I can't tell you how much that means to those family members of those people, that their family was discredited
Yes,
and belittled, and it was all because of someone's ego.
That's right. I just think that's great. You cleared things for posterity.
Well,
So
thank you for saying that.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you so
There's a
much, both.
picture-
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. There's a picture of that big gouge in Archuleta's Mesa on page 16 of our book.
Yes.
You still have a copy, don't you?
Oh, I do.
Okay, good.
Yep, I'm looking at it. Yeah, that is just amazing. So it doesn't look
That was-
natural.
That picture was taken with me with a broken rib and pretty well beat up from an accident before we went out to New Mexico. I'm hanging by one hand taking that picture with a digital camera.
And I might add that if I was up on top looking in other areas, and if I would have known he was hanging off of there, as his wife, I'm all there 100% committed, but
There's a limit.
There's a limit.
there is.
Well, thank you so much both for coming on. You've been delightful, and it's a very interesting story.
Hey, we have a quick offer for any of your listeners tonight.
Yes.
Could I plug the book for a second?
Oh,
Absolutely,
please.
absolutely.
If you go to our website and buy the book, which is www.theaztecincident.com, and in the comments section, whoever buys a book tonight, the first 3 people that buy a book will throw in a 1-hour DVD documentary that's all about our research on the Aztec. And along with the book, so you'll get a $24.95 hour-long documentary absolutely free if you buy the book. If you don't want to buy a book off our website, it's available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, or wherever fine books are sold.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's now on audiobook too, so we're excited about that.
Oh, terrific. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Very good. Scott and Suzanne, we thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Our delight.
And good night.
Okay.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
All right. So that is Spirit Radio, the Paranormal Experience, for another week. And
Yes.
Craig Mosier and the Graveyard Shift is coming right up.
And good night, everyone, and thank you so much for listening.